As scientific and historical knowledge progressed in other fields of research, and especially in the criticism of the scriptures, scientific methods were gradually applied to the study of Masonry, so that today there exists a vast body of fairly accurate and most interesting information upon the history of the craft. In consequence of this and other lines of investigation, there are four main schools or tendencies of Masonic thought, not in any way necessarily defined or organized as schools, but grouped according to their relation to four important departments of knowledge lying primarily outside the Masonic field. Each has its own characteristic approach towards Freemasonry. Each has its own canons of interpretation of Masonic symbols and ceremonies, although it is clear that many modern writers are influenced by more than one school. The authentic school. We may consider first what is sometimes called the authentic school, which arose in the latter half of the 19th century in response to the growth of critical knowledge in other fields. The old traditions of the craft were minutely examined in the light of authentic records within reach of the historian. An enormous amount of research was undertaken into lodge minutes, documents of all kinds bearing upon Masonry past and present, records of municipalities and bureaus, legal and judicial enactments. In fact, whatever written records were available were consulted and classified. In this field, all Masons are greatly indebted to R.F. Gold. R.F. Gold, the great Masonic historian, W.J. Hugan, G.W. Speth, David Murray Lyon, the historian of Scottish Masonry, Dr. Chetwood Crowley, whose work upon the early Irish craft is in its way a classic, and others of the inner circle of the famous lodge, Cator Coronati. Number 2076, the fascinating transactions of which are a precious mine of historical and archaeological lore. Two great names in Germany are J.F. Findel, the historian, and Dr. Wilhelm Begemann, who made the most minute and painstaking researches into the old charges of the operative craft. A vast amount of material, which will be of permanent value to students of our craft, has become available through the labors of the scholars of the authentic school. This school, however, has limitations, which are the outcome of its very method of approach. In a society as secret as Masonry, there must be much that has never been written down, but only transmitted orally in the lodges, so that documents and records are but of partial value. The written records of speculative Masonry hardly antedate the revival in 1717, while the earliest extant minutes of any operative lodge belong to the year 1598. The tendency of this school, therefore, is quite naturally to derive Masonry from the operative lodges and guilds of the Middle Ages, and to suppose that speculative elements were later grafted upon the operative stock. This hypothesis being in no way contradicted by existing records, Brother R.F. Gold affirms that if we can assume the symbolism or ceremonial of Masonry to be older than 1717, there is practically no limit whatever to the age that can be assigned to it. But many other writers look for the origin of our mysteries no further back than the medieval builders. Amongst this school, there is a tendency, also very natural when such a theory of origin is held, to deny the validity of the higher degrees and to declare, in accordance with the solemn act of union between the two grand lodges of the Freemasons of England, in December 1813, that pure ancient Masonry consists of 3 degrees and no more, viz., those of the entered apprentice, the fellow craft, and the master mason, including the supreme order of the Holy Royal Arch. All other degrees and rights are, among the more rigid followers of this school, looked upon as continental innovations, and are accordingly rejected as spurious Masonry. As far as interpretation goes, the authentics have ventured but little farther than a moralization upon the symbols and ceremonies of Masonry as an adjunct to Anglican Christianity. The anthropological school. A second school, still only in process of development, is applying the discoveries of anthropology to a study of Masonic history with remarkable results. A vast amount of information upon the religious and initiatory customs of many peoples, both ancient and modern, have been gathered by anthropologists, and Masonic students in this field have found many of our signs and symbols, both of the craft and higher degrees, in the wall paintings, carvings, sculpture, and buildings of the principal races of the world. The anthropological school, therefore, allows a far greater degree of antiquity to Masonry than the authentics have ever ventured to do, and traces striking analogies with the ancient mysteries of many nations, which clearly possessed our symbols and signs, and, in all probability, ceremonies analogous to those worked in Masonic lodges today. The anthropologists do not confine their studies to the past alone, but have investigated the initiatory rites of many existing tribes, both in Africa and Australia, and have found them to possess signs and gestures still in use among Masons. Striking analogies to our Masonic rites have also been found among the inhabitants of India and Syria, interwoven with their religious philosophy in a way which renders entirely impossible the idea that they were copied from European sources. Masonic scholars have by no means exhausted the facts which may be discovered in this most interesting field of research, but even with our present knowledge it is clear that rites analogous to those we call Masonic are among the most ancient on earth, and may be found in some form or other in almost all parts of the world. Our signs exist in Egypt and Mexico, in China and India, in Greece and Rome, upon the temples of Burma, and the cathedrals of medieval Europe, and there are said to be shrines in southern India, where the same secrets are taught under binding pledges, as are communicated to us in the craft and high grades in modern Europe and America. Among pioneers in this field, we should mention Brother Albert Churchward, the author of several interesting books on the Egyptian origin of Masonry, although it may be that he is not always quite sufficiently critical. Brother J.S.M. Ward, the author of Freemasonry and the Ancient Gods, who was Hiram Abiff, and a number of other works, who looks to Syria as the source of Masonry, though he has compiled a mass of valuable information from many other lands, and Mr. Bernard H. Springett, author of Secret Sects of Syria and Lebanon, who has collected much material bearing upon Masonic rites among the Arabs. To the work of the anthropological school is due a clear revelation of the immense antiquity and diffusion of what we now call Masonic symbolism. It tends, however, to find the origin of the ancient mysteries in the initiatory customs of savage tribes which, although admittedly of incalculable antiquity, are often neither dignified nor spiritual. Another important work which has been accomplished by its efforts is the justification of many of the higher degrees to be considered pure ancient Masonry. For in spite of the pronouncement of the Grand Lodge of England quoted above, there is just as much evidence for the extreme antiquity of Rose Croix as of craft and arch signs and symbols. And the same may be said of the signs of many other degrees as well. It is quite clear from the researches of anthropologists that, whatever may be the precise links in the chain of descent, we in Masonry are the inheritors of a very ancient tradition, which has for countless ages been associated with the most sacred mysteries of religious worship. The mystical school. A third school of Masonic thought, which we may call the mystical, approaches the mysteries of the craft from another standpoint altogether, seeing in them a plan of man's spiritual awakening and inner development. Thinkers of this school, on the record of their own spiritual experiences, declare that the degrees of the order are symbolical of certain states of consciousness, which must be awakened in the individual initiate if he aspires to win the treasures of the spirit. They give testimony of another and far higher nature upon the validity of our Masonic rites, a testimony that belongs to religion rather than to science. The goal of the mystic is conscious union with God, and to a Mason of this school the craft is intended to portray the path to that goal, to offer a map, as it were, to guide the feet of the seeker after God. Such students are often more interested in interpretation than in historical research. They are not primarily concerned in tracing an exact line of descent from the past, but rather in so living the life indicated by the symbols of the order, that they may attain to the spiritual reality of which those symbols are the shadows. They hold, however, that Masonry is at least akin to the ancient mysteries, which were intended for precisely the same purpose, that of offering to man a path by which he might find God. And they deplore the fact that the majority of our modern brethren have so far forgotten the glory of their Masonic heritage that they have allowed the ancient rites to become little more than empty forms. One well-known representative of this school is Brother A.E. White, one of the finest Masonic scholars of the day, and an authority upon the history of the higher degrees. Another is Brother W.L. Wilmshurst, who has given some beautiful and deeply spiritual interpretations of Masonic symbolism. This school is doing much to spiritualize masculine Masonry, and the deeper reverence for our mysteries that is becoming more and more apparent is without doubt one of the marks of its influence. The Occult School. The fourth school of thought is represented by an ever-growing body of students in the co-Masonic order, and is gradually attracting adherents in masculine Masonry also, since one of its chief and distinctive tenets is the sacramental efficacy of Masonic ceremonial when duly and lawfully performed. We may perhaps not improperly term it the sacramental or occult school.